Hello everyone, my name is Ron Keck. In the last video we spoke a little bit about a pro studio versus a project-based studio and some of the attributes that a pro studio gives you versus what attributes of a project-based studio would give you. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of tracking. As I said before, I like to be very methodical in my tracking sessions, so we're going to start with the drums, specifically with the kick, snare, overheads, left and right, and hi-hat, and then toms 1 and 2 in that order. As far as I'm concerned, drums, and being a drummer, drums to me seem to be the basis to getting a great recording. Okay, obviously you got to have a drummer that can play the drums and play them well, and what I mean by that is a drummer who can get good quality sound out of the drums once they're tuned properly. Okay, so how a drummer hits and the tools that they're using to hit the drums with, meaning obviously the drumsticks, will play a big factor in the quality sound of the drums. As far as drumsticks go, I can't tell how many times I've been in a situation where the drums just seem to come out thin, but the drummer's a very well defined drummer, plays very well, but the sound of the drum still seems to have a thin sound. Chances are it's probably because of the sticks that they're using. A lot of times I will always make a comment to the drummer about trying to develop a better, thicker sound, if you will, for a lack of a better term, by using some heavier sticks. Okay, so let's start with the kick drum. The kick drum to me will actually help dictate the style that you're actually going after. Okay, now obviously how you tune the drums is going to play a factor into the style that you're trying to develop. We get folk musicians that come in that are going to use drums. We may not want to have a real pounding kick drum or a cracking snare drum. So the tuning of the drum is going to play a factor here. A lot of the music I do and the music that I like to listen to basically requires a lot tighter, a lot punchier kick drum at the end of the day. Now, I will say this, the kick drum, bass guitar, vocals, keyboards, they all will overlap in terms of their frequency and the color and the real estate that they're actually taking up together. Okay, now keep in mind that you want to be able to hear your kick drum, but you also want to be able to hear the moving lines that are in the bass instrument, as well as the low end of the keyboards, and of course the vocal tracks. Okay, so we'll start with the kick drum. We'll do a little bit of tuning with the kick drum. A lot of times, like I said, I like to make sure that the kick drum has a nice good quality sound to it. In this case, this is already set up in tune. I'm not going to get into super details with it. Snare drum is the next instrument of the drum kit, and as I said, I like to get a nice quality fat sound out of it. It's hard to hear this because obviously you're just hearing it naturally in the room. And then the overheads, for my money, I like to utilize the overheads to concentrate on the transients of the cymbals and some transients of the snare drum, obviously. Okay, but I usually just use the overheads to grab cymbal sounds. I'll use a hi-hat mic to get me a little bit closer to the hi-hat sound, and of course your toms. One aspect of all the instruments that plays a huge factor in quality sound is the fundamental of the instrument. Okay, the fundamental of let's say the toms. Have a nice round fundamental. Now when I say fundamental, I mean the bass tone of that instrument. There are many series of harmonics that are involved with each particular instrument. You got your the fundamental, you got the octave, and then you got a series of harmonics above that creates the tonality of your instrument. Okay, so a lot of times when I go after a nice tone, I'll actually utilize, I'll get right up over the head and listen to it and try to get a concentrated sound out of the drum. Now, a lot of times toms will give you not only your fundamental, but it'll give you these series of harmonics, and sometimes those harmonics are actually louder than the fundamental. That's why when you put a mic on a tom and you get it real close to the rim, what you're going to get is more series of harmonics and not really the fundamental itself. So when I mic a drum set, I like to try to get the mics as far in as possible without the drummer hitting the mic, because again, I'm looking more for the fundamental of the drum. Okay. The other thing is, once you get the drums mic'd up, when you get inside the control room, you're going to want to kind of focus in on your phase, between the microphones that you have, because obviously you've got a bunch of microphones and they're all interacting with each other. 9 times out of 10, that snare drum is going to be slightly out of phase with your overheads. You'll have to flip the polarity so that you get your tonality back. Same thing with the toms. In some cases, you can actually get a very thin sounding tom because you're a little bit out of phase in relation to your overhead and your other mics. So a lot of times I'll go across the board and I'll start experimenting with the polarity switch and see if it changes the tonality of the instrument. As far as the type of mics I like to use, I like to use a Beta 52 on the kick drum, 57 on the snare, C414s for overheads, Sennheiser 904s. They have a nice small footprint. I can actually move them in places where like a 421 is a little bit more difficult to use. And then I like to use a KM85, a Neumann KM85 on the hi-hat. So a combination of those microphones help me get a fairly decent drum sound. Okay, I think that's about it as far as the drums go. By the way, if there's any other questions that you want to ask, you can always reach us online, and I'll be glad to answer any of the questions that you may have.